You step onto a massive floating hotel. Music is playing, people are smiling, drinks are flowing, and everything feels included. The food, the shows, the pools, the destinations. It almost feels like you've already beaten the system. But then, slowly, something strange starts to happen. You pay for a drink, then another. You try a special restaurant. You book an excursion. You take photos. You connect to Wi-Fi. And by the time the trip ends, you've spent way more than you expected. So here's the real question. If cruises look like such a great deal up front, how are these companies making so much money? And before we dive in, if you enjoyed breaking down how everyday things really work behind the scenes, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps more than you think. Because here's the surprising truth. Cruise ships aren't just vacations. They are one of the smartest business systems ever designed. At first glance, the model seems simple. You pay one price and you get access to transportation, accommodation, food, and entertainment all in one place. Compared to booking flights, hotels, and restaurants separately, it feels like a bargain. And that's exactly the point. Cruise companies deliberately price the initial ticket lower than you'd expect, sometimes almost shockingly low, because the ticket itself is not where the real money is made. This is where most people get confused. The cruise ticket is just the entry point. It's designed to get you on board. Once you're there, everything changes. Think about your environment for a second. You're in the middle of the ocean. There are no competitors, no outside options. You can't just walk down the street and find a cheaper restaurant or a different bar. You are, quite literally, in a controlled ecosystem. And in that ecosystem, the cruise company owns everything. The food options, the drinks, the entertainment, the shops, the casino, the excursions, even the bottled water. Every dollar you spend on board flows back into the same system. But here's what makes it even smarter. They don't force you to spend. They design the experience so that you want to. Buffets are included, but premium dining feels special. Water is available, but cocktails feel like part of the experience. There are free activities, but exclusive ones feel more memorable. So instead of feeling like you're being sold to, it feels like you're upgrading your own vacation. And that psychological shift changes everything. Because when people are on vacation, they behave differently. They relax their spending habits. They justify small purchases. They tell themselves, it's just this once. Cruise companies understand this deeply. They know that once you're emotionally in vacation mode, price sensitivity drops. A $10 drink doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like part of the moment. And these small decisions stack up fast. Here's what surprises most people. A huge portion of a cruise company's profit doesn't come from tickets. It comes from on-board spending. Drinks, specialty restaurants, spa treatments, photos, excursions, casinos, shopping, these are all high-margin products, much higher than the original ticket. So while the cruise might look cheap at first, the real business begins after you board. And then there's another layer most people don't even notice. Cruise ships are designed like carefully engineered environments. The layout guides you, the paths encourage exploration. The most profitable areas are placed in high-traffic zones. Ever notice how you often walk through shops on your way to dinner or pass by a bar after a show? That's not accidental. It's subtle, almost invisible, but incredibly effective. Because the more you see something, the more likely you are to engage with it. And over several days at sea, those small nudges turn into real revenue. But this is only part of the story, because what makes cruise ships truly brilliant isn't just how they make you spend, it's how they reduce their own costs while doing it. And that's where things get even more interesting. But this is where the business becomes even more impressive. Because while cruise companies are finding smart ways to increase what you spend, they're also incredibly efficient at reducing what they spend. And that combination is what makes the entire model so powerful. Here's the part most people never think about. A cruise ship is not really treated like a hotel. It's treated like a moving country. And that changes everything. Most major cruise ships are registered in countries like Panama, the Bahamas, or Malta. This is known as a flag of convenience, and while it might sound like a small detail, it has massive financial implications. Because by registering in these countries, cruise companies can benefit from lower taxes, looser regulations, and more flexible labor laws. This is where most people get confused. They assume cruise companies operate under the same rules as businesses in their home countries. But in reality, they operate in a kind of global gray zone, choosing the jurisdictions that are most financially advantageous. That means lower operating costs on a massive scale. And then there's the workforce. Cruise ships employ people from all over the world. Staff often come from countries with lower average wages, and they work long contracts, living on board for months at a time. From a business perspective, this dramatically reduces labor costs compared to hotels or resorts in places like the US or Europe. And labor is usually one of the biggest expenses in hospitality. But it doesn't stop there. Think about fuel, food, and logistics. A cruise ship is essentially a floating city that needs constant supply. So instead of buying in small quantities like a regular hotel, they buy in massive bulk. Food, drinks, supplies, everything is optimized at scale. This is where cruise companies start to behave less like tourism businesses and more like highly efficient supply chain machines. They plan routes months in advance. They coordinate with ports around the world. They optimize fuel usage based on distance and speed. Even the destinations are part of the strategy. Here's what surprises most people. Cruise companies don't just visit destinations. Sometimes they own them. Private islands in the Caribbean, for example, are often owned or controlled by cruise lines. And when passengers visit these islands, guess what? They're still spending money inside the same ecosystem. Food, drinks, excursions, rentals, it all loops back to the cruise company. So even when it feels like you've left the ship, you're still inside the business model. And then there's one of the most underestimated parts of the entire system: predictability. Cruise companies are masters at forecasting behavior. They know, on average, how much a passenger will spend on drinks, how many will book excursions, how many will visit the casino, how many photos will be purchased. Over time, with millions of passengers, these patterns become incredibly precise. So instead of guessing revenue, they can almost engineer it. And when you combine predictable spending with controlled environments and optimized costs, you get a business that is surprisingly stable, even in an industry that depends on travel. But here's the bigger picture. The brilliance of the cruise ship business isn't just about making money. It's about how seamlessly it blends psychology, logistics, and environment into one experience. You feel like you're on a relaxing vacation. They're running a highly optimized economic system, and the two things happen at the same time without you really noticing. So the next time you see a cruise deal that looks too good to be true, it probably is, just not in the way you think. Because the real value of a cruise isn't just in getting you on board, it's in everything that happens after. If you enjoyed seeing how something so familiar hides such a smart system underneath, leave a like, share this with someone who loves traveling, and subscribe for more breakdowns like this, because sometimes the simplest things hide the most misunderstood truths.